Wait a minute, we're working on a Mercedes. Basics basically aren't basics when you're working on a Mercedes-Benz, are they? Alright guys, Brian Culotta here again. We have a 2010 Mercedes-Benz E550. It was towed into us. The customer complaint was the vehicle does not start. So first thing I do, I go out to the vehicle and confirm their concern, and sure enough, the vehicle does not crank. So I go back into the shop, I get the other guys, and we go ahead and push the vehicle in. The first thing I do with a no start concern would be to check the battery. I open the hood, and sure enough, that battery is brand new under the hood. So I grab my tester, the battery is fully charged, battery tests fine. The fact that I see a brand new battery kind of sparks interest in my mind to see if there's any back history with this vehicle. So I go ahead and I talk to my service writer, and the customer happened to be still in the waiting room, and we made some questions with the customer, and the customer then admitted to jump starting this vehicle many times. He said he's been dealing with this issue for a few months now, where the battery was low and he would go out to the vehicle and he would have to jump start it. He said he's been doing this for 2 or 3 months, where he's had to jump start the vehicle in the morning. Since then, he's replaced the battery and has said that the problem hasn't changed. So jump starting it, I guess, helped it, but I'm not sure. So we're going to begin to do some testing. This is a starter circuit. First thing I want to do is pull up a wiring diagram just to confirm that I'm testing the correct circuits and to see what's involved. And at the same time, I'm going to be doing a code scan of the vehicle. I want to see if there's any diagnostic trouble codes in any of the modules that could potentially cause this thing not to crank. Maybe there's an immobilizer code or something like that, or some other reason why a processor is not allowing the vehicle to crank. So I'm going to grab my AutoLogic Assist Plus, and I'm going to do a quick scan of all the modules within the car and see what I pull up. Alright, so my scan tool finishes the quick test, and turns out that none of the modules have any diagnostic trouble codes in them, which is kind of rare on a Mercedes-Benz. But I kind of attribute that to the battery being replaced. I'm assuming the customer didn't use a memory saver on this vehicle, and when the battery was disconnected, it most likely cleared the modules. So there's no diagnostic direction via trouble codes to go by. So we're going to do some conventional testing and see what's going on. So I go back to my wiring diagram, and you'll see here the driver's side SAM control module is the component that houses the starter relay. Let me zoom in here, you can see a little bit better. The starter relay it appears to be a pretty simple circuit. There is a power feed coming from the rear SAM control module. There is, of course, the load side of the relay would be going down to the starter solenoid. And then the control side of the relay, you have a battery plus and a ground, both coming from the engine control module, the ME-SFI. Essentially, the engine control module is what provides the power and ground to this starter relay. So if there were any immobilizer faults or shift interlock problems, trans range sensor problems like that, that would all be determined prior to the engine control module grounding that starter relay. Alright, so I'm going to do some quick testing on this. I know the starter on this vehicle, I've already done a visual inspection, is pretty easily accessible. So I go ahead and I grab my headlight. I use this all the time for testing loads. I want to make sure that this violet white wire can carry the appropriate current to be able to control the starter, and I use this test all the time. I prefer this test over using an LED or a power probe or anything like that. This proves that this violet white wire circuit is not only intact, but it also can carry the appropriate current needed to energize the starter solenoid on this vehicle. So I grab my headlight, and I have another technician hop in the car. I raise him up. You guys know how it goes. I get my test light, my headlight on the starter, and I have him put it into the crank position, and sure enough, this headlight does not light up. So I have a control problem to this starter. So my next step would be to figure out why I do not have control down to that starter. Potentially the wire going to the starter could be bad. I could have a failed relay. I could have a control problem to the relay. I could have a fuse that's blown. You know, something's going on where that relay is not energizing, or there's a broken wire, something like that. So the best thing I can do is find a central location to begin my testing. And in this case, and in a lot of cases, using the starter relay is a great central location to begin your diagnosis, because you can get to the main power feed, you can get to the control, both the power and ground for the control. You can also get to the load at the relay. So you can get to all aspects of what controls that relay and essentially what controls the starter. So I'm going to go into service information and find out where that starter relay is. Now I know it's in that fuse block, however I don't know which of the relays it is, so I need to identify that relay before I begin anything. Alright, so I pull up service information. I find the driver's side SAM control unit with fuses and relay. All of these fuses are labeled, and all of the relays are labeled as well. I find that the image here does not match the image or the shape of the fuse block that I have. You know, it looks nothing like this. The fuses aren't in this position. The relays don't look like this. This isn't my fuse block. So I decided to use another source of service information. This unfortunately was Mitchell, and this is the only thing that I could find related to the fuse block on this car with Mitchell. So I decided to use something else, and I ended up going up to ALLDATA. ALLDATA has a nice colored photo, and they even went the extra mile and put a box around the appropriate starter relay. That's pretty awesome. However, when you scroll down on that same page, they identify the starter relay as L, or N10-1. If you go back up here, that position of the relay is different than the one they put a box around. So which one is it? Is it this one, or is it this one? So what I ended up doing is checking the control to both of the relays. I want to see if any one of them has the control needed to essentially energize the relay. I start with the one they put a box around because that seemed like if they're going to put that much effort into making this, they probably would have done it correctly. Or maybe they put this photo in because they knew this was wrong. I'm not sure. But either way, I'm going to check this one first. So I check the control of the relay, the power and the ground to the coil side of the relay, and the ground is missing, which comes from the engine control module. So that tells me that the engine control module, for some reason, is not grounding the relay. Now again, I want to make sure that I'm testing the correct relay, and so I go ahead and I test the other relay right here. Same situation with this relay. The ground side control of the relay is missing. So I don't technically know which relay it is, but I do know that neither of them are being commanded. Now, we all know that these higher end vehicles can be a little bit more challenging to diagnose, but frankly, a lot of that can be attributed to the service information that we are provided, especially in the aftermarket. And also, especially if we have service information that doesn't match what the vehicle is built with. you remember when I pulled up the Mitchell diagram of that fuse block, and it didn't even match the car, it didn't even match the fuse block at all that I had. And then I went to All Data, and they had two pictures right next to each other, with one having an arrow pointing to one relay and then the other picture having an arrow pointing to a completely different relay. You know, that is a challenge in itself. We need to figure out what's going on here. You know, there are enough variables alone with the way vehicles brake, and now we're going to add more variables with our service information. That makes things much harder. But a good technician can see these problems and identify them before he is potentially going down the wrong path. You know, as soon as I saw that there was a discrepancy there, I wanted to make sure that, you know, I'm going to have both relays right next to each other. Let's check them both, see if any one of them have any control problems. And sure enough, they both do. So I got something going on here, and I need to figure it out. So I go back to my AutoLogic, and I pull up the body section of the scan tool, and you get this big list of data PIDs here, or other modules that you can talk to. And in there is the electronic ignition switch. I go ahead and click that, and I get a drive authorization section of the scan tool. And from my understanding, all of these PIDs, all these data PIDs here, are different portions of the immobilizer that are stating that they grant a start condition. So the fact that all of these say yes, to me, means that the vehicle should be granted the permission to start. There's no immobilizer fault at this time. So there should be no issues with the key. There should be no issues with anything that causes the vehicle not to start related to immobilizer. So I go back, and I go back into the engine control module, and within the data list there is a data list that's called status of circuits, and within there is what I'm most concerned with is circuit 50. And if you go back to the wiring diagram, circuit 50 is actually the control to the starter relay. In this photo, I am holding the ignition key to the on position, and you can see that the data reflects that. It says that it's on. So that tells me that the ignition switch is properly working. I know I don't have immobilizer faults. I've already looked into that. This thing should have control to the starter relay, yet it doesn't. So now what do we do? Fortunately, I have a lot of good friends that help me with diagnosing vehicles all the time. That is the huge benefit of networking, which is another thing that Trained by Techs likes to promote, simply for reasons like this. When you are stumped and you're not sure where to go, sometimes talking to somebody else that may be more familiar with these type of vehicles can really help you out. We have a chat set up for the Trained by Techs members, and I happen to bring up this topic with the other guys, and I end up talking to Keith DeFazio, and he always tells me on these vehicles that you need to find the fishbowl. And I think what he means by that is look for the water. You know, open a trunk, go under the carpet, you know, look for water. So I end up opening up the trunk, and sure enough, I find a fishbowl. Inside the trunk is this nice glass vessel. I thought it was kind of a funny coincidence that I find what looks to be somewhat like a fishbowl. However, lifting up the carpet in the trunk, there is no signs of water. But I thought it was funny, pretty humorous, and I kind of shared it with Keith that there technically was a fishbowl in the back of his trunk, but there was no moisture. And I didn't stop there. I, of course, went to the front of the vehicle looking for moisture in the carpets, the back seat, you know, whatever I can find to potentially find some moisture. I guess it's pretty common on these vehicles to get wet, and when that happens, all kinds of havoc happens to these vehicles. So, of course, I'm going to be looking for that. Unfortunately, I didn't find anything like that, and we continue testing. Back in the Trained by Techs chat room, the other Keith chimes in, Keith Perkins, and he mentions that we know that this control module is feeding the starter relay, and often when you have the control module controlling a component, they have the potential to have what they call circuit protection, and by circuit protection, I don't mean a fuse. I mean the module has the capability of sensing faults within the circuit and disabling them if they see a fault. And his suggestion was to, instead of use a headlight, to use a lab scope. And the whole purpose of that is because the module may be capable of sensing that fault faster than I will see with a headlight or see with a voltmeter. And what I mean by that, it may potentially ground that relay faster than I'm going to see with the headlight or the meter. So he suggested using a lab scope. And the whole purpose of that would be to see that momentarily ground control to the relay and attribute it to a potential shorted circuit, open circuit, etc. It would give me some direction on to figure out why this thing doesn't have control. So I'm like, alright, I'm a scope guy. That sounds like a great idea. I'm going to grab my scope and connect to the S terminal and see what's going on. I know the starter is really easy to get to. I've said that before. Wouldn't take a couple seconds to do that. So I get my scope out and I connect to the S terminal. And I go ahead and put the vehicle into the crank position, and now the vehicle has control. At the S terminal, I now have 12 volts. However, the engine's not cranking. I'm like, okay, let me grab my headlight. Let me see if that changes, because let me go back to the way I tested it the first time where I proved it was bad, and now it's showing that it's good with the scope. So I put my headlight on the S terminal circuit, and now my headlight lights up. So why do I have control now? And now it looks like I have a bad starter. So just for giggles, I grab my power probe and I want to see if this starter can actuate with an alternative source of power, just to, in my head, satisfy that. And sure enough, the starter does not rotate. I do a voltage drop on the big battery cable going to the starter, and that is good. I have a bad starter. That's a basic test. What happened? Was the module capable of sensing that? Even though that the module is only technically capable of sensing the current within the relay coil and not the S terminal load? Is that what happened? Alright, going back to the wiring diagram. We know that the engine control module is the guy responsible for providing the battery voltage and the ground to the starter relay. However, the main voltage feed to the starter relay is fed via two of these fuses, which is odd, but also it's fed from a rear SAM control module. Back to the topic of circuit protection. Does this rear SAM control module have the capability of sensing an open circuit or a short circuit or a high resistance circuit, what have you? Does it have the capability of sensing that? I know I have a bad starter. Does that module see that problem? And does it potentially, because it is on the network, does it have the capability of sending a message over to the engine control module to say, hey, I see a problem with my starter, let's go ahead and not start this thing until it's fixed. A starter motor was sold, installed, and now the vehicle starts every single time. The customer has had the vehicle for a couple weeks now. We have called them and confirmed that the vehicle's fixed. They are happy as can be, no problems at all. So I'm going to end this video with a question for you guys. You guys are smart. The rear SAM control module is the voltage feed to my starter relay. Does it have the capability of sensing an open circuit? Does it have the capability of sensing a short circuit? Does it have that capability of being on the network and communicating with the engine control module to tell it not to have control to the starter relay? These are all questions that I have unsolved. And I'm hoping that someone out there has a rational explanation of why I didn't have starter control to the relay. You know, we always remember the ones that threw us under the bus and dragged us down the road for a few hundred miles. So I'm hoping to get some closure from you guys. Maybe some of you have some insight of why I didn't have starter control. I mean, this is kind of like an easy thing to diagnose, you'd think. A starter, I mean, I've done this many times before. Why did this car throw me under the bus? So I'm hoping to get some feedback from you guys, some suggestions, maybe a different diagnostic path that you may have taken, and we could put this to bed. It would be nice to have some official closure of, you know, what happened to this vehicle. I wanted to thank each and every one of you guys for watching. You are why we do what we do. Your feedback is important to us, so please leave any feedback you have, and thanks for watching.